recording. All right, welcome to today's mapping snack training on race and ethnicity in Dave's Redistricting app, or DRA. First, we're going to take a quick look at how race and ethnicity are defined by the Census Bureau and for the purposes of redistricting. Then we'll explore what data on race and ethnicity is available in DRA. Then we're going to highlight how race and ethnicity can be understood while drawing, analyzing, and visualizing maps. And we'll close with the Q&A with Dave Bradley. Feel free to put questions in the chat as we go, though we may not answer them until the end. Before we dive in, a super quick introduction to the Nonpartisan Redistricting Data Hub, or RDH. Our mission is to make all the data, tools, and knowledge necessary for identifying gerrymandering and drawing legally compliant maps publicly available. The mission of Dave's Redistricting app, or DRA, is to empower civic organizations and citizen activists to advocate for fair congressional and legislative districts and increase transparency in the redistricting process. DRA has a wealth of data, including updated 2022 elections day data in particular states from RDH, and a ton of features, only some of which we're going to discuss today. Race and ethnicity are complicated topics in any context, and that includes redistricting. The Constitution and federal and state laws provide a number of considerations and guidelines around race and ethnicity, both in terms of how it is defined and in terms of how it can be used in drawing redistricting maps. State and federal courts have also contributed to our understanding of race and ethnicity by defining some of the language in state and federal laws and the U.S. Constitution. In terms of how race and ethnicity can be used when drawing maps, there are two federal principles that guide how map drawers should approach things. First, the Equal Protection Clause, which is in the 14th Amendment, has been interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court to prohibit using race or ethnicity as the predominant factor in drawing. In other words, it is illegal to draw a map using racial data as the primary basis for drawing lines. In addition, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 includes a prohibition on discrimination in voting based on race, color, or creed. Because the prohibition does not distinguish between discrimination that is intentional and the result or effect of policies regardless of intent, this implies that race and ethnicity data should be considered when drawing a map in order to understand whether discrimination has occurred. Combined, these principles suggest that race and ethnicity should be taken into account when drawing maps, but should not be the primary consideration. And because these are federal principles, they apply to all redistricting maps, whether they are congressional, state legislative, or local. Beyond these federal principles, states have also adopted a number of laws that guide redistricting at the local and state legislative or congressional level. For example, states differ in how they define race and ethnicity when it comes to redistricting. We researched whether redistricting bodies in 14 states publicly defined how they measured race and ethnicity, and you can access these reports at the link we'll put in the chat. Within the report, you want to click on process-related data to see whether they made these definitions publicly available. States also differ in their approach to using race and ethnicity in map drawing. As you'll see in some of these reports, a number of states indicated that they did not use any race data at all when drawing. States also differ with respect to language around minority voting rights and redistricting. For example, some states like New York have recently adopted state voting rights acts. These mimic the language at the federal level and in some cases expand on it. Other states like Florida explicitly include prohibitions on racial gerrymandering in their state constitutions. In early 2023, we worked with volunteers at We the Action, which connects volunteers with legal training and organizations such as ours to research this language in most, but not all states. You can check out our database to see what protections your state might have around minority voting rights in redistricting specifically. All states utilized data from the Census Bureau in order to draw their redistricting maps this cycle. The Census Bureau follows standards for collecting and reporting race and ethnicity that were established by the Office of Management and Budget in 1997. These standards apply to all federal agencies, including the Census Bureau, and require collecting Hispanic ethnicity and race in separate questions. The link is in the chat for you to read more about these OMB guidelines. In the 2020 census, each race question also asked for ethnic origin to be added by hand by the respondent. So you can see what this looks like. This is a sample copy of the 2020 census form. On the bottom left, you can see the question about Hispanic ethnicity. And then on the right, you can see the questions about race, where the individual selects one or more racial categories to identify with. And then they would fill in additional ethnicity information in the open-ended section. When the Census Bureau finishes collecting and coding all the information from the decennial census forms, they release it in a number of data sets. The primary data set for redistricting, known as the PL 94-171 data, or just PL data, includes population data for 5 racial categories: white, Black or African American, Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and then there is a final catch-all, some other race category. All of these racial categories are reported both for Hispanic and non-Hispanic separately. And because race and ethnicity is reported alone or in combination, this leads to a number of permutations for racial and ethnic categories. For example, there is data on people who are white and Asian and non-Hispanic. There's data on people who are Black or African American and American Indian or Alaska Native and Hispanic, and so on. If you want to see all the possible combinations, go to our fields and description page, which is linked in the chat, and that outlines all the race and ethnicity data available in the PL data for redistricting. One thing to keep in mind is that how the Census Bureau collected race and ethnicity in 2020 is not the same as how they did it in 2010. We have lots of links for you today, and we'll put another one in the chat here if you'd like to learn more about the changes to the census data from 2010. This means that comparing race and ethnicity data across the decennial censuses is complicated by these changes in methodology. There are already groups advocating for changes and improvements to the census in 2030 as well. For instance, a number of groups that we work with support changing the definition of white to no longer include people of Middle Eastern and Northern African descent. Okay. So now that we have a sense of how race and ethnicity are recorded and available in the census data, let's talk about what you can get in Dave's Redistricting app. Population data by race and ethnicity in DRA comes from 2 sources: the 2020 decennial census data, or PL data, and the American Community Survey 5-year estimates, or ACS data. The ACS data uses the same racial and ethnic categorizations as the PL data. However, there are a number of key differences between these data sets that you should be aware of. First, the census data is an enumeration of the population, meaning they strive to count everyone and collect data from everyone. The ACS data is based on a sample. It's a really large sample, but it's still just a subset of the population, and thus it is just an estimate of the population. The second key difference is the reference date. The census data is tied to Census Day, which is April 1st, 2020. They don't actually collect data from everyone on this date, but that is what they strive for, and that is the reference date for this data set. In contrast, ACS 5-year estimates are collected over 5 years. So the 2020 ACS data was actually collected starting in 2016 through 2020. That also means that really the best reference date for this data is in the middle of the 5-year block. So 2018 for 2020 ACS data, for example. The last key difference between these 2 data sets is what level of geography they're available at. The census data is available at many levels of geography, including the census block, which is the smallest reporting unit for which the Census Bureau makes data available. By contrast, the ACS data is only available at the block group level or larger, although you can access ACS data at the block level in Dave's Redistricting app due to the disaggregated data that is available. So when you go into Dave's Redistricting app, you will find that you have the option to select various data sets, including population data sets. You can choose between the 2010 and the 2020 census data. And this data is broken down by total population as well as voting age population. The voting age population is defined as the population that is 18 years of age and older and is often referred to as VAP. If you'd rather use ACS data, you can select 2019 or 2020 5-year estimates. But again, remember that sort of the reference date for these data sets is a bit older than that, 2017 and 2018 respectively. The data is available for total population and citizen voting age population, or CVAP. CVAP is defined as the population 18 years of age and older and who are also citizens. CVAP is available in the ACS data, but not the census data because the census form does not ask about citizenship. And we've put another link in the chat there for you to learn more about the details of the population data currently available in DRA. As I noted earlier, the possible combinations of race and ethnicity add up to several permutations. So the DRA team has selected those combinations that tend to typically be used when it comes to redistricting. You will find VAP and CVAP for non-Hispanic white alone, and in the case of all other racial groups, alone or in combination with other races, including Hispanic. Because of these choices, the sum of these categories is greater than the total population. For example, somebody who identifies as Native American and Hispanic would be counted in both the Hispanic category as well as the Native American category. Also note that VAP by race alone, excluding Hispanic ethnicity, is also available. Before we jump into seeing how this data can be used in DRA, I just want to flag one important consideration that depends on the state that you're drawing or analyzing a map for. In this last redistricting cycle, 13 states addressed what's known as prison gerrymandering in their congressional or state legislative districts by adjusting their population data. This is a complicated topic that we don't have time to get into today, but for now, I want to flag just a few things about it. First, there were 13 states that addressed prison gerrymandering this past cycle, but only 12 states released a publicly available adjusted data set. DRA has these publicly available adjusted data sets in their tool, and they have aimed to set the correct population depending on what map you're creating. However, it is ultimately your responsibility to double check and understand the requirements in your state. Lastly, we have a training on this exact topic in the works, so stay tuned to learn more at a future mapping snack training about how to do prison gerrymandering analysis in DRA. All right, let's get to the fun part, drawing and analyzing maps in DRA. First, drawing. I will have screenshots to walk you through each of these steps as we go, but because we're going to cover a lot of ground very quickly, I recommend for this training to not try and follow along at home, but instead watch the demo and try it out for yourself later. For whatever unit of geography you are currently drawing with, whether that be blocks, precincts, cities, or counties, you can hover your mouse over one of these geographic units on the map and see race and ethnicity data for that unit on the right. As you draw, you can also see race and ethnicity data for districts update automatically on the left. Just select the district of interest and then district details. What data you see is what data you select. To change the data displayed in the map, you would go to Settings, Data Selector, and then Display or Hide Data Sets. So here I am in DRA, and you can see the gear icon in the top right that enables the settings. I've selected that gear icon, and a menu has opened on the right-hand side. Here is the data selector within that menu. And then I scroll down until you see Display or Hide Data Sets. I would select Choose Data Sets and then select what population data I want to display while I'm drawing my map. Let's say I selected 2020 voting age population data from the census. So you can see here a map that I am working with. I'm currently drawing with precincts. As I hover my mouse over a precinct, that's the grayed out area just below the blue district in progress, I can get the precinct level data on the right-hand side. In this case, it's Kellytown precinct. If I switch over to drawing with counties, then again, I can hover my mouse over the county and see the racial and ethnic population data for, in this case, Henry County on the right-hand side. If my interest is in the district level statistics, then with the same map, I can click on the left-hand side, the district of interest. In this case, let's say District 2, and then District Details, which will show me the racial and ethnic composition of my district in the map at present. So currently in this image, I have the radial button on 1. And so it would show me the details for District 1. And you can see that at the top of this selected red box, the District 1 is highlighted. So I would select District 2. And then I'm going to select District Details to expand the data on the left-hand side. So because you can see data at any geographic unit which you are using to draw or the district level, this does give you a lot of flexibility in terms of data that you can pull up on demand in DRA. So let's talk about map analysis as well. There are 3 ways in which DRA can provide you racial and ethnic information about the map as a whole, going here in order from simpler to more complex. There is the statistics page, which gives you a breakdown of all districts by race and ethnicity. There is the analyze page, which provides summary data on all districts' populations, as well as a DRA indicator for opportunities for minority representation across the map as a whole. And finally, there is the advanced page, which contains a demographic voting analysis. Again, the data displayed depends on what data you have selected in the map settings. In this case, you would go to Settings, Data Selector, and then select Primary Data Sets. But let's see what this looks like so you can utilize these tools in your map later on. So I'd select my gear icon in the top right-hand corner to open up the settings. I go to Data Selector. And in this case, I go to Primary Data Sets for analysis. So this is above the display or hide data sets. Once you've selected your data, you'd look to the top menu to find all of your analysis buttons. So currently we're on the map. You can see it's shaded sort of a light pink there. And the button next to that is Statistics, which we're going to look at first, then Analyze, which we'll look at second. Then we're going to skip Compare today. We've already done a training on that. And then finally, look at Advanced. You'll notice I've switched to the adopted map for Georgia's congressional districts, just so we'd have a complete map to work with here for the analysis features. So first, statistics. You can see I've selected that button in the top right menu. This is the simplest way to analyze a map as a whole, just looking at the racial and ethnic composition of all the districts in your map. So in addition to information about the population and partisan lean, you'll see the population data broken down in this table. And again, the data is going to be whatever you selected. The Analyze page provides a few pieces of information about race and ethnicity in your map. The first is a table containing summary data on the population by district. The population is whatever you selected. Unlike the statistics table, which provides the percentage of each racial or ethnic population that comprises each district, this table tells you how many districts contain a population that is within a particular percentage range. So you can think of it as sort of a summary of the statistics table. It also calculates the number of proportional seats. This calculation assumes that 100% of this group votes cohesively, meaning they all vote for the same candidate. It also assumes that this group turns out to vote at the same rate as the rest of the population in the district. It takes this number and multiplies by the number of seats to estimate proportional districts. A simple example would be if you had a state with 10 congressional districts and Asian Americans constituted 8% of the population, the number of estimated proportional seats would be 8% times 10 districts, or a little less than 1 seat, 0.8 of a seat. In both cases, the table includes data on individual race and ethnicity categories, as well as combined into a single non-white minority category. Again, you can see I've selected the Analyze tab in the top menu. The links at the top left are to jump down to various metrics within the Analyze page. So you can select minority representation, or you can just scroll down until you see these tables. The top table shows you the number of districts within certain percentage ranges of, in my case, VAP, but it could also be CVAP if you selected that. And this is for each racial and ethnic group as previously defined, and then all minorities together in the first column. The bottom table gives you these values, but statewide, rather than making predictions district by district and summing them up. Georgia has 14 congressional districts, and minorities make up nearly 50% of the VAP, so this predicts, with some rounding, 7 seats. The Analyze page also includes a DRA indicator for opportunities for minority representation across the map as a whole. Let's look at the definition of this metric and then break it down. The rating computes seat probabilities for each category, giving full weight to opportunity to elect districts, but discounting coalition districts by half, uses what would be a proportional number of seats for the different categories as benchmarks, normalizes the number of likely opportunity and coalition districts to a 0 to 100 scale where bigger is better, and then combines them into a single rating. Like I said, there's a lot packed in there. So let's just break it down and rephrase it a little bit so you have at least a general understanding of what this metric is telling you. If there's interest, put it in the chat and we'll think about hosting a future mapping snack training that does a deep dive into these analysis features and the mathematics behind them. So to do this, we're going to make some assumptions that we made previously for estimating proportional seats. We're going to assume that 100% of a racial or ethnic minority group votes cohesively, supports the same candidate, and 100% of the majority group votes together. We're also going to assume that turnout among these two groups is equal. Given these assumptions, we can then calculate the probability that each racial or ethnic group would win individual districts in this map specifically, and calculate it as a proportion of all possible districts given the statewide VAP. We repeat this for all racial and ethnic groups individually, and then all combined together. Each of these values are multiplied by 100 just to normalize it to a thermometer scale. So it's going to range from 0 to 100. And then we're going to combine all the values for the individual groups and the combined coalition group into a weighted average, with districts for minority groups combined counting half as much as districts for individual racial and ethnic groups. So here it is. You can see the rating scale goes from 0 to 100. It's a relative scale relative to the estimated number of proportional seats. So it doesn't tell you anything about the specific number of districts or even which districts, but it's meant to provide some summary information about the percent of districts that minorities could have an opportunity to win in this map out of the maximum estimated number of districts all minority groups might have an opportunity to win. As you now know, in order to generate this metric, you have to make assumptions about turnout rates and support for candidates within groups. So that's one good reason to view this metric as informational, but far from the final word on compliance with the Voting Rights Act. Another is that when maps are litigated under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, it's fairly common to have a number of experts involved. Mapping experts, experts in statistics, historians, demographers, all sorts of folks with deep backgrounds and extensive trainings to demonstrate that vote dilution has occurred and a remedy is possible. So I want to be clear that the minority representation metric in DRA cannot substitute for this kind of expert analysis and can't tell you whether a map is or is not compliant with the VRA. Indeed, many of the nonpartisan groups we support have expressed some concern about this and that folks might interpret this metric as indicating a map is or isn't compliant. And as you can see, the DRA team also wants to make sure you understand this by providing this disclaimer. You can learn more about how the metric is calculated at the link provided in the chat. For our last analysis, we'll go to the Advanced tab. This contains a demographic voting analysis. Here you get to change the features. You select which racial or ethnic group you'd like to compare against either non-Hispanic whites or against all other groups combined. You also select the district of interest and then click Analyze. Within that district, it will plot on the X or horizontal axis the percent VAP by precinct of your selected groups. On the Y or vertical axis, it plots the percent of the two-party vote share going to Democratic candidates. Then it plots two best fit lines through these two groups of data. It uses these best fit lines to estimate what percent of the vote would be Democratic or Republican if a group comprised 100% of a precinct, and then displays that in a table. All right, here we go. I've selected the Advanced tab. Again, you'll see those blue links at the top. You can either scroll down until you see this table and graph, or you can select demographic voting to skip down. I've selected District 6 and I want to compare Hispanics against everyone else. Then I'll click Analyze and let's actually take a look at the graph before the table since the graph informs the table. So in the graph, the percent Hispanic VAP in each precinct in District 6 is plotted in orange and the percent VAP that is everyone else is plotted in gray. So this is the horizontal axis, and then the vertical axis again is the percent of the vote going to the Democratic candidate in each of these precincts. So if you had 50 precincts in District 6, you would get 100 dots on this plot, half looking at the Hispanic population in each precinct and half looking at everyone else in each precinct. Now, if you take these best fit lines out to where they cross 100% of the VAP for Hispanics, for the orange line, or for everyone else for the gray line, you'll get estimates that are displayed in the table. I've put arrows here to point to where that best fit line for Hispanics would cross the 100% VAP threshold. It's actually off the charts, right? Way up here. And where the best fit line for everyone else crosses, which looks to be about 35%. Here's the table that goes with this graph. The orange line for Hispanics, as I said, extended off the map, but they cap the predictions at 0 and 100% of the vote. So this estimates that if you have a precinct that is 100% Hispanic, which is not observed in this data, but instead estimated based on the best fit line, we would predict that precinct goes for the Democrat 100%. For everyone else, if we look at the predicted vote share when VAP is 100%, it's 35%. And once again, we see this disclaimer here that this does not ensure VRA compliance. The analysis typically done by experts involves more election results specific to the district at hand, primary election results, may also use different population data like CVAP or even data from voter files, and then applies some additional statistical principles that can't easily be incorporated here. So like the opportunity for minority representation metric, this provides interesting insights into the map, but it is not a substitute for a racially polarized voting analysis, nor is it the definitive word on whether meaningful opportunity districts are required or exist in the map. With our few minutes remaining, I want to show you some really neat ways to visualize race and ethnicity in DRA. There's 3 ways to do this. You can add labels to your map that show summary statistics for all racial and ethnic groups by precinct. You can add coloring to your map that colors precincts by the relative proportion of a particular racial or ethnic group in each precinct. And you can do a racial dot plot, which visually displays all racial and ethnic groups on the map. Let's see it. So first is precinct labels. Here you have the option to show race and ethnicity by precinct as labels. For this, you'll go to overlays on the left-hand side. There are 4 label buttons there, and you want to select the second one down. It's got a little arrow button to indicate that there's more information. You click that and then select up to 3 labels. I would also recommend selecting show values as percentages unless it is the total number of people that you are interested in seeing displayed. So here under overlays, you can see the 4 label options. We're looking at the second one with the down arrow. You would click that, select 3 groups. In my case, I selected to show as percentages, and then you see them displayed for each precinct. I chose Hispanic, Black, and Asian, and you can see what percent of each precinct's total VAP or CVAP that a particular racial or ethnic group comprises. Perhaps you'd like to see this a bit more visually. Then precincts or districts coloring by demographics would be good for you. So go to colors on the left-hand side, select demographics with the down arrow. There are 2 of them. The top one is for districts and the bottom one is for precincts. Then select the racial or ethnic group of your choice to visualize, or select all minorities. So again, we're on the left-hand side here. We've opened up the colors box. On the top is the demographic button that I've selected to plot districts by the percent Black voting age population. Alternatively, I can go down to the bottom of the colors section and select plot by precinct. In this case, I selected all minorities to plot. One final visualization that's really powerful is the racial dot plot. How this works is it takes the population as reported in each census block, say 100 people. Then it randomly displays a dot for each person in the block, so 100 dots. Census blocks aren't large, but they might include places where we wouldn't expect people to live. So please don't be alarmed if you see that happening. The dots are color coded as follows. White is blue, Black is green, Asian is red, Hispanic is orange, and other is brown. And then you'd go to overlays on the left-hand side and select racial dot plot. You'd select the down arrow to change from voting age population to total population if desired. You can also change the opacity of the dots to make it darker or lighter on the map. This is the final product. I've selected racial dot plot, and it's really quite a stunning visual. So that was quite a lot because there's just so many neat things that you can do with race and ethnicity data in DRA. But if there's only a few things I want you to really remember from today's training, it's this. When drawing or analyzing maps, make sure you know how race and ethnicity are defined. For example, does Native American mean Native American alone, or anyone that identifies as Native American, even if they also identify as another race or ethnicity? If you are drawing a map, you should not use race or ethnicity as the predominant factor. However, it is wise to assess your map for compliance with the Voting Rights Act. That typically means getting an expert involved. Finally, know that analysis metrics in DRA provide really useful information, but should not be interpreted as a measure of DRA compliance. You can read more about DRA and compliance with the Voting Rights Act at the link in the chat. So that concludes today's mapping snack training. We will go ahead and